Hi everyone, this is Wonderful Sanister, and today we're going to be making a St. Patrick's Day bracelet, which consists of a heart and a clover leaf. So with this small bracelet I have here, which is my field attempt for my first tutorial, we're going to be using the flat alpha technique and the straight edge technique, which means we need 4 colors. We need 1 color for our base string, and then a color for the leaf, and I cut red for the heart. So I'm going to cut these strings most of it off camera, but I'm still going to show you. So for my bass strings, I need 9 bass strings, but I'm going to be making a loop, which means I need to cut 4 strings, fold it in half, and then sort out how I'll attach one more string to that bunch, which will make it 9. Now, I'm going to show you something. So you can have a standard measurement for your alpha bracelets by taking a normal bracelet that you have, or just like measuring your wrist, and you take your string, the string you want to cut, put it to the tip of your bracelet, your tassel end or however you ended it, move it up by 2 inches, then pull the bracelet, well, stretch the string all around the bracelet, turn it, and take it back to the other side of the bracelet. So it's already folded in half. Wherever the 2 strings meet, cut it there. For me, that's 25 inches. For you, it might be different, but I use a general measurement on my wrist, which is about 6.3 inches. So I've cut 4 strings of that, and I folded them in half. Now I'm going to show you how I cut the 9th string. So I need to cut an extra string for my bass string, and I need to cut 1 leading string, which is going to be the same color. So I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to be making triangle starts. So I'm going to add about 5 inches to the 9th bass string. Then I'm going to take that string and move it all the way around. Now where I'm holding is where the 9th string ends, and from that is where the bass string begins. So from that point on, I'm just going to measure out 15, or I'm just giving a wide measurement. I'm going to measure 25 inches on that side, and I'm going to cut it off. From where I'm holding now, I'm going to take that side that is 25 inches, which is our leading string, and I'm going to make backward forward knots over the rest of the string to create my loop. Now I'll show you that again. So the first half is a backward knot, which is making a D and then pulling through that loop, and then the second half is making a 4 and pulling through that loop. Now you're supposed to continue making backward forward knots until you get to the size you want your loop to be. We're going to make triangle starts here, so your loop don't have to be that big, but it just have to be wide enough so your strings can pass through. Now removing that string we used to make our loop, divide the bass strings into 2. That's 4 bass strings, 2 on each side. Take the one on the right and make a backward knot on it. Now moving over to the one on the left, we're going to make a backward forward knot. So backward and forward knot. And now we're going to open the 2 bunches. So the string we have on the left, open it. Then open the one we have on the right too. So we have 2 strings on each side and 2 strings in the middle. So taking the one on the right, we're going to make another backward forward knot. Now we're going to make 2 forward knots that on those 2 strings in the middle. So a forward knot on each string. So on the final string here, that's on the edge on the right, we're going to be making a forward backward knot. And that's actually the end of a triangle start on the right part of the loop. Moving to the left part, we're going to do the same thing. So taking that loop out, which is actually our 9th string this time, bear in mind, we're going to divide our strings into 2 like we did previously. Take that 9th string and make a forward knot over the first string, that's the left bunch, sorry. Now move that to the right bunch and make a forward backward knot this time. So making a forward backward knot here. Now we're going to open the bunch like we did previously. So we have two on each edge, and we have one on each edge, and we have two in the middle. So taking the one on the edge again, taking what's on the using a night string, we're going to take what's on the edge and we're going to make a forward backward knot. So remember straight edge technique, so forward backward knots on each edge or backward forward knots, don't forget. Now we're going to make two backward knots, those are on those two strings in the middle, and on the left, which is on the edge, we're actually going to be making three backward knots actually, because this is our ninth string, so we're not going to be using the straight edge technique in this case. And because we have an odd number string, and I didn't want to introduce a new string to make this triangle end since it was really small, so three knots instead. And there you have it. We are done with our triangle start. We're actually going to get started with the bracelets. Now, just for a precaution, I make one extra row on the top, so I'm making sure that all my strings align with each other. So to do that, I'm going to make knots from the right to the left, which would be a forward backward knot on the edge. Now I'm going to make seven backward knots. I'm going to make a backward knot on each of these strings. Now this is the last string I'm making on the triangle start of the right. So I'm going to connect this with the string on the other side, and I'm going to do this by making the first half of the backward knot. Then I will bunch it together and make the second half. So I'm making the first half, then I'm going to make the second half now. Then I'm going to use one finger of my left hand and push those two loops together, and use the second hand and pull my string up. In that way I have closed the gap. And this is the reason why I make one extra row when I make triangle starts, to make sure that this flows properly. I'm going to continue making my remaining knots, which are just remaining three. So three more backward knots, and then on the edge we are going to be making a backward forward knot. So here we're going to be making a backward forward knot, straight edge technique, remember. And we've completed our first row. If anything is looking out of place, you can use a ruler or your scissors and just pull everything onto when it's in a straight line. So now I'm making the second row according to our pattern. This is the first row actually in our pattern. We're going to make one plain row of leading strings from left to right. So that means we're going to have our backward forward knot on the edge, 7 forward knots, and on the edge of the right we're going to be having a forward backward knot. Here we're going to be making a forward backward knot, and this ends our first official row. So I'm going to start counting the second one from here. Now for the second row, we're going to make 2 knots of white first. We're actually going to be making this heart now, so we're going to get started by making 2 knots of white, then 3 knots of red, and then 4 knots of white. So I've separated all these strings by colors. Now getting started, make a forward backward knot on the edge and 1 backward knot. And those are our 2 knots of white. It's not really white, it's more like cream, but those are 2 knots of the leading string. Now we're going to be swapping to our red string And for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be taping this particular red string down, only the red string though. So we're going to tape the string to the back of the bracelet while we're taping it under the bracelet. So we're going to bring it in between the strings you want to swap out. So we're going to pick the first string of the three we're going to make red knots with. Now we're going to make the first half of the backward knots on that string. Then take our base, we'll take our white string and pass it through that and under the remaining two and towards the left. You can choose to pass this under all your strings. I'm only passing it under the two because it's easier for me to just bring it back later. Now complete the second half of your backward knots and you've successfully swapped strings. Now make 2 more knots with red. If you've gotten to this point, you notice that the white string is already in position. So we're just going to make the first half of the backward knot with it. Now we're going to pass our red string through that first one and under the remaining and towards the left. And we're going to complete the second half of the white knot. Now if your knot is looking a little big, just pull on the red string and it will be adjusted immediately. But remember to do this before you make any other knots with the red string. Now on the edge, remember to make your backward forward knot. Now we're beginning our next row, our third row. So we're going to take 3 knots of white, 5 knots of red, and 1 knot of white on the edge of the bright. So now starting again, another backward forward knot. And then following that, we're going to have 2 forward knots. Now we're going to swap to our red string now, bringing back that in between the 2 strings and making the first half of the forward knot this time, pulling the white string through that and under the remaining 4 and towards the right, making the second half of our red knot. And there, we swap strings again, so we're going to make 4 more forward knots with our red string. Now we're going to swap back to our white string, and because we're color changing strings at the edge of the bracelet, I'm going to be showing you something. So take the red string and just slip it under the last string, moving towards the right, there. Now bring back our white string. We're going to make our knots without the red string this time. So you're not going to be tangled anyway. I'm just locking the red string there in that position actually. So making my forward backward knot on the edge here. I've ended this row, and to start the next one I'm going to make the same thing again because we have only 1 knot here. So taking that same edge of the bracelet, remove 2, and then so we have 2 white knots and 6 red knots. Starting the next row with the same knot, a forward backward knot, then bringing back our red string. Now if you notice here, you won't see it sticking out on the edge and you won't see it falling apart. So this is my perfect way. If you don't like it, you can figure out yours. I think there's another way to do it too. So I'm going to swap strings to the white and proceed to make my 6 red knots. 6 red knots. So now we're going to swap back to our white string for the remaining 2 knots. So we're still going to make the far offer technique, which is when we make 1/2, then pass the red string through that under the last one and all the way to the left, and then complete the second half of the knot and make the forward knot on the edge. Now for the next row, we're only going to make 1 on the edge here. It's shocking, right? So we're only going to make 1 knot here of white, and then 6 knots of red and 2 knots of white towards the right instead. So we're currently in the middle of our heart. So swapping to our red string, bringing that back. I'm sorry about the weather or the change in the brightness. My curtain is flipping open and closing because I think rain wants to fall. Hopefully not. Anyway, so we're swapped to our red string and we're going to make 6 knots of red. Currently made 1, so we're going to make 5 more knots of red, or in red, or with red.
English.
I feel like my heart is a little wonky, so I'm just going to try to push this up a little. There, it's okay now. So I'm going to swap back to white to complete the last 2 on the right. So I'm making the first half of the forward knot. And we're going to make our forward backward knot on the edge to complete this row. Now we're going on to the next row, and we're going to start that with only 1 knot of white, 2 knots of white on the left, and 6 knots in between. So we're going in reverse, the order we just came from. So it's going to be pretty easy, I guess. Yeah, easy. So make the first knot of white, which is going to be a forward backward knot, then swap to your red string, make 6 backward knots with red, 6 backward knots with red, yeah. And now we're going to swap back to white to complete the end of the row, making 2 white knots. So we are going to make our last knot, which would be a backward forward knot. Now for our new row, we're going to start with 3 rows of white, 5 rows of red, and 1 row of white on the other side. The chair went off. Wow, I just lost my headache. And now swapping to our red color, we're going to make 5 knots of red. First half. Now we're making the second half. And 4 more knots of red. Now we're going to swap back to our white string. We are almost done with our heart, as you can tell. So we're going to pass that red string towards the under the last one and towards the right, and then bring back our white string and make our forward backward knot on that. And now this is the last row for the heart. So we're going to take two strings. I'm going to make two white knots. The first one is the forward backward knot and the second one is a backward knot. Now we're going to make 3 rows of red. So bring back our red string and make only 3 rows this time. Now swapping back to our white string, we're going to make 4 knots of white. And as we're swapping out, now we are finishing with our red string for the next couple of rows. Because we are finished making our first heart. We're finished making our first heart. We're moving on to the second part. So now for the next row, I'm just going to be making rows of pure white. Because we have one row space in between each design. You can choose to make it 2. I'm making it 1 because I feel like I want them to be a little closer than they usually are. And most of the patterns I make are centered. So this is kind of a new experience for me. So I'm getting to the point where my string is almost short. It's already short. I have to swap it out with another one. I'm not going to tape down the string. I'm going to show you how to hold it. If case you're using a clipboard or pin, so just take the other edge and use your left hand or whatever hand you want to use and hold it down to the back of the bracelet. Now using the other parts of your fingers, make the first half of the knot. Pass your string through. Make the second half of the knot. Now you notice I didn't pass my string under. So I'm going to make this first half of another knot, then pass that string through and under. And make the second half of the knot. In my case, it was a forward knot. In your case, it could be backward knots. But advice, do not swap strings at the end of your bracelets. It's just not supposed to happen like that. Anyway, now we're going to begin the clove part of the bracelet, which is the fun part. I think this is the St. Patrick part mostly. So introducing our green string now. We're going to take 2 off and then the next 2. So we're going to start with 5 knots of white. Now we're going to be introducing our green string because we have the next 2 knots to be in color green. Again, I'm not going to be taping down my string. I'm just going to hold it to the back with one finger and then use my mini fingers to swap out my string. I'm making the first half of the backward knots. Passing my string on through and under the other one out of the way and making my second half of the backward knots. And there. So we're going to make one more backward knots in green. And now we're going to swap back to our white string where we complete this row by making 2 more knots. That's going to be 1 backward knot and 1 backward forward knot on the edge. So we've gotten to the end of the first row for the green, for the clove leaf. Now for the second row, we're going to start with 3 rows of white. So now we're going to be bringing back our green string. We're going to make the next 2 knots in green. Two forward knots in green. Now we're going back to white. I'm going to make the remaining 4 knots in white. Ignore my voice, it's going off again. I don't know why. And now we'll make our final knot to end this row. Now moving on to the next row, we're going to make 4 knots of white, 1 knot of green, and 4 knots of white. So 4, 1, 4. Now we're going to make our 1 knot of green. Now, when you make the first half of the backward knot, don't just pass your thing through and to the left, don't put it under, and then make the second half with green. So we are going to make the remaining 4 with white, which is the reason why I didn't want us to pass it under any string since we're going to be using it. So we'll make 2 backward knots and 1 backward forward knot on the edge. If you've enjoyed this tutorial so far, please give me a like and subscribe, and if there's any tutorial you want me to make, please leave a comment. And if you would like to buy me coffee, the link is in my description. So to start our next row, we'll make 2 knots. That'll be 1 backward forward knot and 1 forward knot. Now this is going to be done a little differently because this is the advanced part of this tutorial actually. So make our second forward or our first forward knot. Now we're going to bring our green string and make 2 knots with the green. So 2 forward knots with the green string. And now we're going to make 1 forward knot with the white string. So remember the previous row where we didn't pass the white string under? That's what we're going to be doing here. So we're going to make the first half of the knot, pass the green string through that, like just on top of that towards the right. On top of that towards the right. And then we'll make the second half of the with the white string and there. So now we're going to go back to our green string because we're going to make 2 knots with the green. So 2 forward knots with the green string. Now we're going to swap back to our white string and make the last 2 knots of white. 1 forward knot and 1 forward backward knot. We are 3/4 or 1/4 way done with our leaf. Now I'm going to make the last knot, which is a forward backward knot. And the next row we only have 1 forward backward knot on the edge, and then we have 1 forward backward knot on the other side. Oh sorry, not on the other side. Now the knots in between will have 3, 1, 3. So let's start. So let's make the first knot of white a backward and forward backward knot, and then to the next 3 strings we are going to make them with the green one. So 3 backward knots with green, and this is like what we did before. We're just going to make 1 knot with the white string. So we'll make the first half with the white string, pull up, pass the green string through towards the left, and then make the second half with the white knot. There. Now we're going to make 3 knots with the green string. Now remember how I told you to change strings on the edge? Take the green string and pass it under the last string there, and move it towards the left under. Now use the white string and make your backward forward knot, effectively trapping that green string there. It's not sticking out, at the same time it's going to separate. Now we're going to repeat this row we just did again. So we'll start with 1 backward forward knot with the white string, moving on to 3 green strings. That will be 3 forward knots with the green string. Now we're going to swap back for the 1 knot of white. Make the first half, pass the green string through, and make the second half of the white knot. Now we have 3 more knots to make with green. Now on the edge we're going to swap strings like we did previously. Pass the green string under the last string there, pull it towards your right, and then use our white string and make our forward backward knot. Now we're not going to be repeating the previous row. Instead we're going to have the first 3 strings. We'll make 3 knots of white, then 3 knots of green, then 3 knots of white. So starting with our forward backward knot again, we'll proceed to make 2 backward knots of white. And now we're going to make 3 backward knots of green. Now we're going to swap back to white and complete this row by making 2 backward knots of white and 1 backward forward knot on the edge. Now that we've completed this row, we're going to go in reverse of the last 4 rows. 3 rows. So we're going to make 1 forward, backward, forward knot on the edge. Then the next 3 knots will be in green or with green. And now we'll make 1 knot of white. Now the next 3 will be 3 forward knots of green. I think I just tangled this by mistake. Oh, okay. Now we're going to swap back to white. And for this row, we're going to be repeating the previous row. So that means 1 forward backward knot, 3 backward knots with the green string, then 1 backward knot with the white, and then 3 3 backward knots with the green string, and the last one will be a backward forward knot on the edge. And if you managed to stay so far in this video out, thank you. I don't expect you to stay this long, but if you have, thank you very much. And I forgot to mention that the link to the pattern will be in the description below. I didn't put an image of the pattern on the screen because I didn't want to confuse anybody, just in case you can't follow along with the video and the pattern at the same time. So if you're done with this, please go back and check the pattern. It will be linked in the description, and it's from Bracelet book. So this is the second to the last row of our leaf. We're going to swap back to white for our final knot of the row. Make a backward forward knot. Now for the next row, we're going to have 2 knots of white. That's 1 backward forward knot and 1 forward knot with the white string. Now the next 2 strings are going to be made with the green string. 2 forward knots. And as usual, we're going to make one forward knot with our white string in the middle here. And now we're going to swap to our green string. We're making two knots, two forward knots with the green string. And the last one. Now we'll swap back to white. And we are officially done with our green string for the next couple of rows. So we finish our first heart and we finish our first clover. Now we're supposed to make one row of plain color, that's one row of white. So I'm moving from the right to the left. But I'd like to explain something while I'm doing this. So according to the pattern, we are going to be starting the heart from the left. Meanwhile, when we started this tutorial, the pattern said we should start the heart from the right. So regardless of whether it's left or right you're starting from, you're still making the same amount of knots. At the beginning, we made 2 knots of white, then 3 knots of red, and then 4 knots of white. But according to the other side, we're going to start with the 4 knots of white this time, then move to the 3 knots of red, and then we have the 2 knots of white. But if you want to follow the exact way I did it again, make 2 rows of whites this time. So we're going to go from right to left, then left back to right. So you're going to make 2 rows instead of 1, and then you can restart this tutorial. But if you're feeling brave and you think you can do it, then you can open up the pattern, and where I'm stopping, you can continue it from there. And if you would like me to continue, like to make a part 2 of this tutorial, let me know in the description below. I didn't want to show you how I make the hearts with the other part of the pattern because I thought this tutorial was already long and I don't think I'm that interesting, so I decided to just cut it short here. But again, you have 3 options. You can choose to follow the pattern and start the hearts from the left this time, or you can make 2 rows of whites. I'm currently making my first row of whites. You can choose to make 2 rows of white, so then you can restart the video and you can start making your hearts from the right this time, which is how we started in the beginning. Or you can let me know in the comment section if you would like to see a second video of this, and I will make it. But for the people that are feeling brave and think they can actually do this, I'm going to show you how to do it from the left. So I've divided my string into 4, 3, and 2, which is weird. 4, 3, 2. Anyway, so I'm going to make my first 4 knots of the new row with white. Now we're going to swap to our red string this time because we're done with the green string. We're going all the way back to red. So swapping to our red, I'm just going to bring the string down from there because I don't want to cut it then attach it again. I can just trim it off if I don't want it when we're done with the bracelet though. So now I'm going to make 3 knots with the red string. And now we're going to bring back our white string and make the last 2 knots with it. So hope you can see that we started from the other side, but we're making the same amount of knots we did at the beginning. So it's still the same thing, just different sides. Now our forward backward knots. And for this next row, we are going to have 1 white, 5 red, and 3 white. So let's start it again with another forward backward knot. We're going to switch back to red and make 5 backward knots with red. Now we're going to swap back to white and make the last 3 knots with our white string. That's 2 backward knots and 1 backward forward knot. And now for this row, we're going to make 2 white knots. That's 1 backward forward knot and 1 forward knot with the white string. Then we're going to proceed to make 6 red knots. So swap to red and make 6 knots, 6 forward knots with red string. Now we're going to swap back to right. Remember to be careful when you're changing your string and the edges of bracelets. And the next row, we're going to have 2 knots of white. And then after this, we're going to swap to our red string and make 6 knots of red, 6 backward knots of red. And now we're going to swap back to white for our last knot on the edge. I made a mistake. No, this is not how I'm supposed to do it. So my strings are tangled at the back, which is not how they should be. So red is supposed to be on its own under the last base string, and I'll bring up the white string and trap the red there. Yeah, got it. And make our backward forward knot, and we've officially completed half of our heart. Now I'm going to make the next one, which will be 2 strings of white, 6 strings again of red, then the last string will be of white. So you can see that this is also very easy. The only difference is the sides I started on and the sides I'm going to end with. The same thing is going to happen when I'm making the clover leaf. So we'll still start on the other side instead of starting at the same side we started with. That's the only difference. Again, I'm going to be stopping after this knot that I just finished making, because I think this tutorial has been long enough. So I'll be showing you how to make ties or how to end this bracelet. We started with a triangle start, we're going to end it with a triangle end or triangle ends. And I make 6. Actually, I make 3 hearts and 3 leaves, and it's my perfect size, and I ended it by adding 2 extra rows. But because this bracelet was a little thinner for some reason, I added 4 extra rows instead of 2 like my previous bracelet. And that's my size, and my wrist size is actually 6.3 inches. So that's it. Now I'm going to pick the first 4 strings on the right. Now I'm going to divide those into 2, so 2 in each bunch. Then taking the bunch on the right, we're going to make a backward knot on it, or a backward forward knot, sorry. Then onto the next bunch, we're going to make a backward forward knot. And now on those bunches put together, we're going to make a forward backward knot. And I'm going to be making twisted ties, not plated ties. I didn't like the plated ties I made previously. So take 3 on one and 2 on the other side and roll them together. Twist each individually towards the left, then twist them on each other towards the right. And going to the left now, we're going to take the leftmost string on the edge, move that aside. This string we extended at the beginning, remember? Now take the other 4, divide them in 2, take the first one, the left bunch, and make a forward knot. On the right bunch, make a forward backward knot. Now over these 2 bunches together, make a forward backward knot. And we're going to make twisted ties the same way we did before. 3 in one bunch and 2 in the other. Twist them individually towards the left and then twist them on each other to the right. We're going to end this by making a knot. Just a basic knot. And then pull. And your ties don't have to be the same size. There's a time when I was doing one short, one long. Didn't like that. But they don't have to be the same size just in case you don't get the same size. It's still okay. And snip. So I'm going to show you how I cut my excess string off. I just take my scissors, go as close as possible to the bottom, go as close as possible to the string, and I snip it off like that. And I do that for every single string. I don't use glue or nail polish. I just snip them up and I let them go. They don't ever come loose, which I'm happy about. And there, that's it for my St. Patrick's Day bracelet. Thank you for watching this tutorial. If you want to make just a plain centered heart bracelet, I will leave the tutorial linked in the description and up above here. Thank you for watching and I hope you have a very nice day. Bye!